Today, millions of people walk through Central Park without thinking twice. They jog past quiet lakes, sit on benches under massive trees, and take photos of one of the most famous parks in the world. It feels peaceful. It feels permanent. It feels like it has always been there. But in 1858, something happened that most Americans were never taught in school, because this land was not empty. It was home to a real community, a community with houses, churches, schools, and families. And in order to create Central Park, New York City made a decision that would erase that community from the map forever. In the early 1800s, New York City was expanding rapidly. More ships arrived every year, more immigrants filled the streets, buildings grew taller, neighborhoods became crowded, and life became louder and harder. Wealthy city leaders began to worry that New York was losing its balance. They believed the city needed a large green space where people could escape the noise and pressure. Inspired by famous parks in Europe, they imagined something bold, a massive public park in the middle of Manhattan, a place of beauty, peace, and control. In 1853, the government officially approved the creation of what would become Central Park. But there was one problem. Thousands of people already lived on that land. One of those places was Seneca Village. Founded in 1825, Seneca Village became one of the first communities in New York where free Black Americans could legally own property. This was more than just land. At that time, owning property gave Black men the right to vote. It gave them power. It gave them independence. Families built homes. They planted gardens. They built churches. They created schools. They created stability in a world that rarely offered it. By the 1850s, about 225 people lived there, including Black families and Irish immigrants. They lived side by side. They built something rare. They built belonging. Seneca Village was not a poor settlement as some later claimed. Historical records show that many residents owned multiple properties. They invested in their future. Children played in the streets. Families gathered in churches. People built lives they believed would last for generations. For many, this was the first time in their lives they truly controlled their own destiny. But everything changed when the city decided that their homes were standing in the way of something bigger. Using a legal power called eminent domain, New York City claimed the land for public use. This meant the government could force residents to leave, even if they did not want to sell. Families were told their land would be taken. Some residents protested. Some fought back in court. But they had little power against the city. Compensation was offered, but often it was far less than the true value of their homes. Many families were forced to accept payments that could never replace what they had built. Their houses were not just buildings. They were symbols of freedom, progress, and survival. By 1857, the process had begun. Families packed their belongings. Churches closed their doors. Schools shut down. The community that had taken decades to build was dismantled in months. In 1858, demolition crews arrived. Homes were destroyed. Structures were torn apart. Streets disappeared. Trees were planted where families once lived. Slowly, every visible sign of Seneca Village was erased. The land was transformed, and Central Park began to take shape. If you are enjoying this story so far, leave a like so I can bring more hidden American stories like this. Because what happened here was not just construction. It was replacement. A thriving community was removed so something new could exist in its place. When Central Park officially opened, it quickly became a symbol of pride. People admired its beauty. Visitors celebrated its design. It became one of the most famous parks in the world. But most people never knew what had been there before. The story of Seneca Village was not widely taught. It faded from public memory. For more than a century, it remained mostly forgotten. Then, in the 1990s, historians and archaeologists began to search beneath the surface. They discovered foundations of homes, pieces of dishes, personal belongings, physical evidence that confirmed what had once existed. These were not just random objects. They were proof of real lives, real families, real people who had been forced to leave. The ground itself held their story. This discovery changed how people saw Central Park. It was no longer just a park. It was also a historical site, a place where something had been lost. Today, markers and memorials help visitors understand what once stood there. They remind people that progress often comes with a price, and sometimes that price is paid by those with the least power to resist. Comment below if you had ever heard of Seneca Village before this, because this story changes how you see one of the most famous places in America. It reminds us that history is not always visible. Sometimes it is hidden beneath our feet. Sometimes it lives in places we walk past every day without knowing. Central Park still stands today. It is still beautiful. It is still loved. But now you know the truth. Before the trees, before the lakes, before the paths, there was a community. There were families. There were dreams. And in 1858, they were forced to disappear. Not because they failed, but because the city decided their story was less important than the future it wanted to build. If you want to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the next video, because some of the most powerful moments in history are not the ones we were taught. They are the ones that were almost erased.